Hello, BookTube. I once again come to you as a forlorn victim of peer pressure. Once again, a couple of other members of the OGBG, the Old Geezers Book Group, in this case, Jason Harrigan at Byways in Brooklyn and Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads, both did book hauls today. And they Skyped me, and as usual, and laughed at me and said that if I didn't also do a book haul, I was a sissy. And I tried to tell them both that it's 2020 and there's no longer any opprobrium that attaches to the term sissy, uh, but they just made rude noises. Even ruder noises than the rude noises they tend to make in their videos. So I was in a bit of a pickle because unlike Mark and Jason, I don't have a car, and it's hot here in Boston today. And going out would be much easier if I had a car. Going out book hunting would be much easier. Granted, I would have to put on pants, but it would still be easier to do than getting on a subway in 85-degree heat. Fortunately, the gods have overseen the problem because I got books in the mail. So I have a kind of a haul. I am technically able to escape peer pressure because I got some books in the mail, including a heavy box. So we'll do that. But first I want to show you the rest of the mail. Because I got periodicals as well. Some of three of the dwindling number of periodicals that I still get. I used to get 30 of them. When I had this channel, I would get 30 of them at a time. Just tons and tons of subscriptions. And I've let most of them lapse, including some really big ones. I've let most of them lapse because I don't know, I used to have a ritual for reading periodicals, and I loved the ritual. And the ritual, of course, the pandemic annihilated the ritual, and it had been largely annihilated beforehand by needing to stay at home for large chunks of every day to care for two old and ailing dogs. And it's like people say, it only takes about 2 weeks to change a habit. So once I realized that I wasn't packing all those things up and heading off eagerly to go to a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant and read periodicals pen in hand. Once I realized that I wasn't doing that, I started to realize how little I missed it. How little not the ritual and my friends there, but the magazines themselves. How I would be getting the National Review or the Nation or something like that, and I realized that once I had a little mental distance, I realized that for most of those issues, I would skip everything but the book reviews in the back, and even then, I would skip some of the book reviews. And magazine subscriptions tend to be really cheap, with the very shriekingly obvious exception of the New Yorker. But even so, that struck me as a waste. So I've allowed these subscriptions to largely go by the wayside. But I do have three here today, and only one of which is literary. The first one is Vanity Fair. This great Viola Davis cover. Look at that. Look at that. I decided to let the great mass of her hair blot out the name of the magazine just a bit. And this Vanity Fair it can be gaudy and it can be shallow. There are a couple of articles in here that are not. In one, a writer goes behind the scenes and a diehard Trump supporter rallies and talks to a lot of these people, and people for whom Trump is a god. They have literally said that they worship him. They don't think he's human. They think he's perfect. He doesn't make mistakes. He can't make mistakes. A total fantasy land. Just totally divorced from reality. And to such an extent that you can't read the article, or any article like it, without wondering automatically how they can just neatly questioning whether or not they can neatly switch off that disconnect from reality in order to do all sorts of other things. You read these people saying, he's a god, I worship him, I worship Jesus, I love God, I love Jesus, but I also worship Donald Trump. I don't think he's human. I think you can clearly see that in news clips. I don't think he ever makes mistakes. I think he speaks for me. I think he knows me. Not knows my demographic, not knows my state or my electoral college math or whatever, but me personally. I think he knows me personally. I think when I talk to him, he hears me. You have to wonder when you read people saying things like that and knowing they're sincere, if they can switch off that is just absolute dementia. And you wonder if they can switch that off in order to drive a car, or to drive your kids on a school bus, or to make your meals, or to manufacture a vital safety component in a car at a local factory. I don't trust them to do that anymore. I think that articles like the one in here throw a spotlight on people who ought to be in intensive round-the-clock medical care and not be trusted as members of society. It's not a question of a political difference here at all. That would be bad enough. There are people who support Donald Trump because they support his politics. To the limited extent that he has any politics, they support his politics. Now, I would like to think that even those people mostly left when he created a concentration camp on the southern border and put children in cages. We're still there. We'll never see their parents again. Cages are unair conditioned. It's blistering hot. Children have no toothbrushes, no blankets, no care of any kind. Most of them in many of these detainee centers, or whatever you want to call them, have been told not to socialize. They've been told not to help or comfort each other. They're never going to see their parents again. They're going to enter into the American criminal system, almost certainly, if they don't die, because we don't know. These are closed systems, so we don't have any idea if COVID-19 has struck these places. We would never know. Press isn't allowed anywhere near them. So, and the press isn't allowed anywhere near them once the Trump administration realized that allowing the press anywhere near what is obviously a chain link concentration camp would be bad PR. And the fact that you know that the guy in charge of that administration is a full-blown psychopath is that he didn't know ahead of time that it would be a PR nightmare to show his concentration camps to the press. But reading this article, I had to wonder, I had the same feeling that I always have when I read an article like this, which gives you personal profiles of ardent Trump supporters. And my reaction is always, I don't want to be anywhere near these people. Not I don't want to share a state with them because they might alter my state's politics, but I don't want to be physically anywhere near them. I don't trust them not to just go nuts. I think they are nuts. So that was a little bit trying to read, especially in light of the upcoming presidential election and its almost inevitable result. And another article that was fascinating here was fascinating for a different reason. There's an article in here about Ghislaine Maxwell, the procurer for Jeffrey Epstein, his procurer of little girls for sex trafficking and sex slavery, who's recently arrested. But so recently that she was still at large when the article about her was written in this magazine. They went to press with her still at large. She was arrested after the fact. And that goes to show you the one defect, the one drawback of glossy magazines like this trying to write about current events that are constantly changing. Vanity Fair often writes about current events that aren't really changing. They'll give you a glowing profile of some author or a glowing profile of the royals of the Netherlands or something like that. And those are always fun to read. Or in this case, and in a lot of cases that I've talked about on this channel, they'll do a great profile of some true crime, some criminal incident. They'll just get somebody to write it up fantastically. There's no danger that you'll be outdated if you do stuff like that. But if you're going to write about something like Maxwell, where the story is ongoing, then you run the risk of running a dated story. And they did this in this issue, coming and going, because the author of this piece wrote it when Maxwell was still at large. The piece appears in Vanity Fair when it hits subscribers' mailboxes after Maxwell has been arrested, and you read the piece before Maxwell has been murdered, which will certainly happen in this coming week. Next week, the week after that, at the absolute most, she will be dead by the time the next Vanity Fair issue comes out, which means this article is doubly redundant. It was very well done, but it was a little bit strange to read when you realize that the events are moving that fast. They're moving right past a diligent researcher. But fortunately, I didn't have to hobnob with the grotesqueries of high society for very long. I also got the greatest magazine in the world, National Geographic. This one with a fantastic article, just a series of interlinked articles, just what you expect National Geographic to do, all about plagues in history, not just the current one that's afflicting the entire world, but massive plagues that have existed in the past. And it is terrific. There's also a fantastic article in here, a nice long article about groups, especially women, fighting for social rights, for civic rights in American history. There's a long stretch of it on the suffragist movement that is terrific, absolutely terrific. But the plague article, oh my. oh my, it was amazing, and especially since it doesn't just deal with the current plague. It also shows you history, including this amazing picture from 1902. That is what smallpox looked like if you survived it. It most often would kill you, but if it didn't kill you, it would leave you with scars that never went away. And we have testimony, oral testimony from Native American tribes who were ravaged by smallpox for centuries. We have many, many testimonies in Native American oral tradition of even strong warriors in communities who survived smallpox, saw what they looked like, and killed themselves. And there were many examples of that in the Caucasian communities as well. And the point that I saw this picture, the point that I wanted to make about it is, aside from the fact that, COVID doesn't leave any physical symptoms behind, any visual symptoms behind. You can be impaired for the rest of your life. In fact, more and more research is showing that even the people who survive are never quite the same again. It's going to be fascinating to see 10 years from now what people make of this disease, when much more of the facts are in. But one of the points I wanted to make about this picture, and the brave young man who took this picture, is that when you look at historical portraits, the kind that fill the National Portrait Gallery or the Museum of Fine Arts in New York or the Tate Gallery, when you look at oil canvas paintings of people like Samuel Johnson or George Washington or the Marquis de Lafayette or whoever, this is what the painter is leaving out. As long as we know, as long as you should keep that in mind. Also for the ladies, for all the famous ladies who have up until comparatively recently, this is what they were leaving out. When you picture the famous Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, for instance, factor that in, because Stuart factored it out. Just an interesting thing. Washington, Hamilton, anybody, any of the founding fathers, it might not have been this to this extent. Might have been worse. One way or another, it was almost unheard of. In human societies for centuries, it was almost unheard of that an adult didn't have something like this on their face. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the tiny handful of adults who had no smallpox scars of any kind, even a light dusting across the nose, used to be very common. There's strong evidence to suggest that a lot of the people who were venerated as staggeringly beautiful, male and female, in the last 5 centuries, were venerated for that fact largely because they didn't have smallpox scars, not because they were actually all that beautiful. But the most disturbing article in here. The plague article was disturbing, if only because it shows that humans, just in general, not just the Trump administration, have an abysmal record of dealing with this sort of thing. Let me get to the article here. The most disturbing article was by the great naturalist David Quammen, and it's about a strip of land in western Uganda, on the shores of Lake Albert, and branching out from there. Communities in western Uganda who have to, in addition to dealing with the horrible stinginess of the land doesn't produce much, and in addition to dealing with everything else, civic unrest and all that sort of thing, grinding poverty as a result, they also have to deal with the fact that steamrollers and gigantic industrial shovels are deforesting the natural population, the natural habitat of chimpanzees that have lived in the area for 370 million years. And it's bringing humans and chimpanzees into conflict with each other. This is the signature photo. Look at that. That is incredible. And the article is called "I'm Scared All of the Time," and it's about chimpanzees abducting little human babies and tearing them apart, maybe eating them, maybe abducting them just because adult male chimpanzees don't like young chimpanzees anywhere around them, and maybe the chimpanzees are just being, a little bit elastic in what they consider. Certainly to a sea turtle, or an African elephant, or I don't know, a farm pig in America, an adult male chimpanzee and an adult male human would be so similar that it'd be only the most intelligent among those animals that could pick out the differences. So maybe the chimpanzees these male chimpanzees are killing these babies, just because male chimpanzees tend to do that. They if they spot a baby, they tend to kill it. But look at one of the photos here. The story starts off with an anecdote about, or a report about a woman who lost a baby to a chimpanzee. She was gardening with her children in the garden. She turned her back for just a second to get some water for everybody. And when she turned around, a male chimpanzee had darted into the garden and taken away her little boy, and ripped an arm off, ripped organs out, and then stuffed the boy under a pile of leaves and ran off. And the boy was still alive, but he didn't live. Of course, he died. And the family moved, and the article has a picture of a troop of chimpanzees looking at themselves in the mirror in the windows of the house. So they came back and just sort of hanging around in the house and garden. And the story goes on about how here we go. There's the landscape, and you can see all the farms, right, that weren't there 10 years ago. And the story goes on about how this is an escalating, tense situation, but thanks to the fact that it's David Quammen and that he's such a great writer, the upshot is not hard to see, which is that these chimpanzees are all doomed. This stretch of land will be chimpanzee free. They'll just be exterminated. I mean, these are the kinds of battles that humans win. And that was a little sad to read. So there was, as usual, that National Geographic had a balance of all sorts of positive and negative things. And there was also the TLS, the Times Literary Supplement, which I love, and which I love giving you a running account of, not so much because of the literary coverage. This is a sports issue. There's lots of stuff on cricket and rugby that was as alien to me as Sumerian cuneiform. But we have been looking at ongoing controversies in the letters column. And those are usually accidental. Usually the editors will run a letter just because it strikes them as spirited, and they never know when it's going to spark a long chain of letters. Now, we saw that once before already here. And it's, I think, going to happen again. Because they ran a letter from David Bentley Hart. I mentioned it in the last time. That was an extremely pompous-sounding letter that vilified Isaiah Berlin. Said that he was a charlatan, that he was well known to be a charlatan, that he was shallow, that he misunderstood the philosophical writers that he was writing about, and that stated all these things in a blasé kind of condescending as-taken tone that I thought at the time was guaranteed to elicit a response from fans of Isaiah Berlin, and that happened in this case. And it's amazing to me because you have a letter. It's by Henry Hardy of Wolfson College, Oxford. You have a letter that is exactly the opposite, hits all the opposite notes to the one by David Bentley Hart, and yet the tone, which I commented on in David Bentley Hart's letter, is exactly the same. Insufferable pomposity, which doesn't really speak well to Isaiah Berlin. These are the kinds of people that know his work, whether they hate it or love it. And he writes a long article, and this is how he starts it off. It's like, this is how he starts off his letter. When taunted by abusive critics, Isaiah Berlin used to deploy the sentiment of J.A. Froude, Oxford's Regius Professor of Modern History in the 1890s, towards his predecessor, E.A. Freeman, who had repeatedly launched bitter attacks on his scholarship. Quote, "I do not wish to enter into any relations with him, even those of hostility." A.F. Pollard observes in his Dictionary of National Biography that, quote, "Freeman's attacks were characterized by unnecessary vehemence and were based sometimes on misconceptions of Froude's meaning and more than once on blunders of Freeman's own." Close quote. That's how he starts. Like 10 names dropped. I find myself in an analogous position after reading David Bentley Hart's disagreeable, unhinged attack on Berlin. His letter is more rant than argument, and I am reluctant to dignify it with a reply. Yeah, sure you are, Seymour. But it having been printed in the TLS, it should not stand entirely unrebutted. Froude, too, did publish a reply to Freeman, adding on the last page, quote, "I shall not be party to any further controversy with him." That's how this guy starts off his letter. The soul of pomposity. So that even if he's making an accurate defense of Isaiah Berlin, you want to put him and David Bentley Hart on a small punt on a deep road, on a deep river, and just let them go. Either of them. So we'll see. My prediction is that this will elicit either a response from David Bentley Hart or a response from someone else attacking Isaiah Berlin, or maybe another person defending him. We shall see. But either way, that is a controversy that the TLS enters into accidentally. And that's usually the way on the letters page. But there's another part of the TLS, the very back, the NB column, written by JC, that sometimes courts controversy. And in this case, boy oh boy, does JC ever do that. I want to read you just a bit of this. Until June 27th, Don Scher was comfortably in place as editor of the magazine Poetry, founded by Harriet Monroe in Chicago in 1912 and brought to international prominence by Ezra Pound. JC mentions that Pound and Frank O'Hara, Robert Frost, Marianne Moore all had poetry published in Poetry magazine. Mr. Scher is generally admired in the poetry world. The magazine he edited featured frequently on this page, the NB column, though the temperature of relations went up and down. He took to Twitter to scold us for saying nothing more than what we have been saying for years, something increasingly evident with each week that passes, that there is no longer any critically authorized tradition of merit in poetry. The contemporary scene is run to a large extent on identity approval, not critical judgment. Mr. Scher was complicit in this new arrangement. The magazine under his editorship continued to publish good work by experienced poets, but he put in a lot of poor stuff too, and he gave us a tweeted cuff around the ear for saying so. Get with it was the message. The world has changed. That message has now got with Mr. Scher, who has been canned from his job. The July-August issue of Poetry carried a poem by Michael Dickman called Shoals Ferry Road. A Twitter user called Hannah Shapiro, who describes herself as Japanese-American, posted a tweet on June 25 to say that reading Mr. Dickman's poem put her into a state of, quote, absolute shock. Ms. Shapiro had to put the magazine down. The shock was caused by the word negress, spoken in the poem affectionately by an elderly woman of diminishing faculties. It is followed by the word Hawaiian, which seems also to have shocked Ms. Shapiro, and the line, quote, a river of Japanese businessmen cross in front of the car, close quote. Ms. Shapiro's tweet, at the time of writing she had 141 followers, caused a different form of trauma among Mr. Scher's employers, the immensely wealthy Poetry Foundation. On the 25th of June, 2 days later, they issued a statement. This is the statement. Get ready, because this is horrible. This poem centers whiteness and employs racist language, which is hurtful and wrong. We published this poem because we read it as an indictment of racism within white families, which is exactly what you should read it as. Anyway, this was a mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake at all. We clearly have more work to do in considering how poems center certain voices and affect our readers. We regret not taking serious action sooner to interrogate the editorial process, and we apologize. JC continues. In the ominous warning that followed, quote, changes in the magazine's structure and process are imminent, close quote, Mr. Scher read an invitation to present himself at reception at the nearest re-education camp. The sans-culottes of the moronic inferno posted, quote, we did it, and moved on. Mr. Dickman, at its highest point, criticism of poetry is guided by T.S. Eliot's suggestion of what serious literary community ought to be engaged in, and that quote is, quote, the common pursuit of true judgment and the correction of taste. J.C. continues, otherwise, why bother? This was what Harriet Monroe founded poetry for. Readers who believe that the common pursuit is advanced by sacking an editor for publishing a poem that shocks a reader are invited to write and put their case. Likewise, if you dispute the assertion that identity approval trumps critical approval, originally made, we now recall, in reference to an edition of Mr. Scher's poetry, we would welcome that too. It would be like old times when debate was the in thing. And that is JC and the TLS, with the full approval of the TLS editorial board, actually eliciting a fight. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. JC usually gets bombarded with responses whenever a call is put out for them. Usually they're trivial things like finding a mention of the TLS in some novel or in something like that. This is a much bigger thing. This is touching straight into the quick wood of identity politics and the culture wars that are currently engulfing certain parts of the West. And I can't wait to see how it turns out. Wouldn't be surprised if that call to arms from JC spills over onto the letters page. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens. In fact, I welcome it. That would be a lot of fun, and you'll be the first to know, because those of you who don't subscribe to the TLS, I will keep you informed. But that was the periodicals that I got in the mail. But in order to save myself from OGBG taunting, I also have books. I have 3 packages here that we'll just go through and see if we can find anything that's going to work its way onto my TBR for tonight. So what is this first one? Also from FSG. Okay. All right, great. Okay, this is for September. These dates could be right now. I think these dates could be right. This is Silences So Deep: Music, Solitude, and Alaska by John Luther Adams, who won the Pulitzer Prize for music. Let's see here. An extraordinary memoir of a path-breaking career in new music and a stirring meditation on living alone in the remote Alaskan wilderness and making art in the age of climate crisis. One of the most important, beloved contemporary composers, John Luther Adams, it's now John Philip Sousa, has received wide acclaim for his music inspired by American landscapes. After an unsettled childhood and a stint in music school, he set off as a young adult for the wilds of Alaska, which would become his home and inspiration for the next 4 decades. Okay. Despite the stereotypes associated with avant-garde composers, certain work by John Cage I could refer you to. They aren't stereotypes. That's a nice try and a save. Adams' music has a way of speaking to people far outside the classical and new music bubble. His more notable fans include Tom York, Iggy Pop, and Taylor Swift, who was so moved by the Seattle Symphony's premiere of Become Ocean, that she made a spontaneous $50,000 donation for the ensemble. Gotta love Taylor Swift. It's so wonderful of her. Just spontaneous. $50,000 was probably all she had on her in her purse. So you gotta love that she was so moved by that composition of incomprehensible cat squalling music that she made a $50,000 donation. It'd be so nice if maybe something were to inspire her to make a $1.7 million donation to the school district of the place where she happens to live. But no, that wouldn't be as picaresque. No. So, all right. So Silences So Deep: Music, Solitude, and Alaska, for late September. Okay. Interesting. Doesn't cut the mustard for making the cut tonight, but I will certainly read it. What have we got here? This next one is a finished copy of some kind. All right. Okay. This doesn't have a pub sheet. Doesn't really need one either. We'll read from the book. We have this. I don't know if it'll make the cut for tonight's reading because I've already read this. I got an e-copy and an e-galley from the publisher, but rereading it is certainly in the cards. Probably this weekend. It's going to be broiling hot for the foreseeable future here in Boston. Just broiling hot. I think the worst of it's going to be Monday when it reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Not anything you want to experience, those of you who aren't accustomed to that sort of thing, because it's going to be 100 degrees Fahrenheit and also 90% humidity. It's going to be like living in a sauna instead of just visiting it to sweat off those creme brulees. But this author, this is A Walk Along the Beach by Debbie Macomber. There is our author in all her glory. She's one of the nicest human beings on earth. And this is her latest book. Just in time for Summer Fling. In August, me and a bunch of other booktubers are doing Summer Fling, where we celebrate romances. This is just in time. So what have we got here? The Lakey sisters are perfect opposites. After their mother died and their father was lost in grief, Willa had no choice but to raise her sister Harper and their brother Lucas. Then, as an adult, Willa put her own life on hold to nurse Harper through a terrifying illness. Now that Harper is better and the sisters are living as roommates, Willa has realized her dream of running her own bakery and coffee shop, bringing her special brand of caretaking to the whole Oceanside community. Harper, on the other hand, is always on the go. Overcoming a terrible illness has given her a new lease on life, and she does not intend to waste it. When Harper announces her plan to summit Mount Rainier, Willa fears that her sister may be pushing herself too far. Harper, for her part, urges Willa to stop worrying and do something outside her comfort zone, like taking a chance on love with a handsome new customer. Sean O'Malley is as charming as he is intriguing. Freelance photographer whose assignments take him to the ends of the earth. Soon, Will is falling for him in a way that is both exciting and terrifying. but life has taught Willa to hedge her bets, and she wonders whether the potential heartache is worth the risk. Familiar sounding stuff, I agree, but I will follow this author anywhere, and I will be happy when I'm done following her there. So I read this book already. You can tell from the plot description, even there, as brief as it is, that the star of this show is Willa. There are much more picaresque things. The man is made, is very intentionally made as an adventurer, and Harper is all the more enthusiastic about seizing adventure in life since she came so close. She was bedridden and so close to losing it all. And those things are put there very intentionally, very skillfully as countermeasures to Willa. And it doesn't take more than 24 pages. And if you're a romance reader, it won't take you more than 24 pages until Willa is by far the only character that you care about. The others are well drawn, but you want to know what she's going to do with her life. I will be glad to reread this, just glad to do it. And I don't know about a recommend. Those of you who know this author don't need me to recommend her to you, but if you don't know her, and you want something that is just going to make you feel good, just solid storytelling is just going to make you feel good, there's nothing wrong in wanting that, especially in 2020. And if you haven't found this author and you want a reliable source of that, look no further. And then we have the box, and then we'll be done. Let's see here. I've got my box disposal unit right here. She is ready. And I have scissors nearby as well, but I didn't use them, did I? I just pried this thing open instead by main force. That's not wise. But let's see what's in this box. Something big. It's just one book too. It's not. What on earth is this? Okay, I'm going to put that down there, but you leave that plastic alone, little girl. You hear me? You leave that plastic alone. Oh my. Oh, goodness gracious. Well, this has to be from one of you. What an amazing thing. This is the Royal Shakespeare. This is the RSC. This is the Royal Shakespeare Company's complete Shakespeare. Look at that. How incredible. Here, it's wrapped in plastic. Let's see what we have here. No, we are not having any plastic. What are you, plastic eating algae? Here, come and see your fans. Ooh. Oh. You are looking at a very unhappy little schnauzer. Not all the time unhappy. Oh, I know you're not. I know you're not unhappy with me, but still. I'm going to be forced in this coming week to be a very stern parent, and that is no easier on me than it is on Frida. But the pavement outside is too hot for her feet. The air is too hot for her to breathe. When the temperature gets above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, we simply have to not. Long walks, adventurous walks, are just out of the question. They can't happen. Frequent walks are out of the question. They just can't happen. And she doesn't like it, but I don't like it either. Nevertheless, look at this thing. Oh, so it's 2,500 pages long with this onion skin paper. Oh, and lots of illustrations. Look at that. David Warner as Hamlet, huh? And that's Mark Rylance. Yes, very young Mark Rylance, but not as young as it could be. Is that Mark Rylance? Yes, it is. You recognize that cheekbone anywhere. You would never know. This is Mark Rylance in 1989 in his pajamas as Hamlet. And you, oh my. Someday, I don't know if it's possible, but someday you really ought to see Mark Rylance when he was a teenager. Oh my. Oh my. There's Ian McKellen. And there's Othello. There's Paul Scofield as King Lear. Fantastic. Oh, there's Ian McKellen again as a very young man. That's his Macbeth. With Judi Dench. Yes, it's Judi Dench. Is he starting? Yes? Yes, Judi Dench. Oh my. Wow. Well, this is just beautiful. So it's got footnotes as opposed to endnotes, and it's got a generous insert of black and white photos, and then it's just all of Shakespeare. A collected Shakespeare. What a weird and wonderful gift for one of you to get me. That is just lovely. Okay, well, all right. So that is your book haul. To get the OGBG off my back, it's 3 books. We have the collected Shakespeare. We have the new Debbie Macomber, and we have a forthcoming book by a Pulitzer Prize winner in music, John Luther Adams. Silence is so deep, about his, it's I guess lyrical essay meditations on Alaska. So that's not a bad mail haul. It's not as many books as Jason and Mark had, but it'll do. Neither one of them pulled down a complete Shakespeare. Plus our periodicals, the TLS, the National Geographic, and Vanity Fair. So that's it. That is the mail for today. I'm gonna wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.